Are you guys going to tell them, or should I explain what happened, or are we just going to hide it away and no one will ever know?
Are you guys going to tell him? It sounds like you're going to go tell the principal of the school. Are
Are
you
you
going to
guys going to
go
tell him?
tell him?
I got to tell my mom.
Yeah.
What are we going to tell him?
So we've been here before in that this is episode 3.
Version
for
2.
us, this is episode 3.2 for us. Someone logged into the wrong account and didn't record themselves. So it's just Michael and Eric talking to each other, and then a lot of silence when I was talking. So we're here again. So nice to see you all.
You know, there wasn't even a lot of silence. It was like non-existent. There was nothing.
Yeah. Yeah,
It was kind of funny. I thought for sure it would be on your machine, though. You know, this thing we use actually has a pretty cool fail-safe kind of protocol, but no such luck.
Well, so technically what happened is I was logged in as a producer and not the host. And when the producer, because both of those roles within the software we use can adjust levels, except the producer is not recorded. And I didn't see that when I was logging in. And so here we are for 3.2. So hi, everyone.
Yeah, you know, the other thing that I was thinking on the last podcast, right after we finished it, was we really didn't even introduce ourselves, which is kind of, I don't think we did. Maybe we did, and I just forgot.
We just went right into it.
Yeah, we did. And I'm like, well, maybe we should at least introduce ourselves.
Well, why don't you introduce yourself,
so
Mr.
I'm
Hollywood?
Michael Morrow, and I am currently in Arvada, Colorado, Denver, Colorado.
I'm Brandon Day. I'm in Denver, Colorado right now. It's a nice 45-degree day out there right now. How about you, Eric?
Yep. Hey, Eric here, reporting from Anchorage, Alaska. I think we're about in the 20s. So it's all the snow
That's warm.
Melted down. The roads, the driveway, you could ice skate down. And now it got cold again with no snow yet. So it's going to be a rough couple of week or so of ice skating around town.
What's the forecast?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get any snow for a while. Well, maybe a little bit here and there, but it's just a light dusting. It's been tough trying to go out back and snowshoe and look for tracks. You can't see anything because there's such a hard crust that it's just everything can walk on top of the snow. But hopefully we'll get some fresh snow and things will start picking up again. Have you been out shooting, Brandon?
A lot of commercial stuff. I'm finally done with all the commercial stuff scheduled. And I went out and we've had a rough go over here. So sickness and other family things coming up. And so I just needed some time out. And I went out to a local refuge. And there's usually some big deer on there just because it's surrounded by city. And they could leave if they wanted to, but they don't because it's surrounded by city wherever they go. And there were some monster muleys out there. And I took a few photos. Nothing too fun though. It was there was one that might be worth a second glance, but otherwise it was all just identification photos for next year. Otherwise it's been pretty quiet. How about you, Michael?
0. It's kind of a bummer. I haven't turned on the camera in a long time. But I too have a bunch of stuff going on with that. It's not photo related or video related at all. So,
although you drove down, so you got to see a lot.
Yeah, I did. I came from Anchorage to Denver, and it was kind of coinciding with something Eric and I did along the way, and we'll talk about it later. But I recorded that whole thing, so hopefully I'll get a video out of that. But that's about it.
Yeah. I see, Eric, you got the spy point set up?
Yeah, I have. I've been having some issues with the spy point cameras. The battery trays in them, for whatever reason. Well, I mean, part of it's my own fault. I do have some rechargeable batteries, which tend to have a slightly larger diameter. But even with like Duracells in it, it's still the battery trays are loose. I don't know if it's just the cold temperatures and the plastic, or if they're just built that cheaply. I mean, they are kind of a discount brand of camera, $100 at Costco. It's not the highest end one, but in the pinch we needed it quick. Yeah. And so I have like some poker chip I found on the trail somewhere inside the one just to hold the battery tray up in it. And then I had my other camera set up for a week and I wasn't getting any signal, so I went back out to check it. And yeah, it's worked before with rechargeables, but this time it wasn't. So I swapped out the batteries and it seems like it's going. But I found a couple areas that I think would look really good if lynx or coyotes or something are moving through. It's kind of on the edge of the creek. So there's a good like 20-foot drop off. So it kind of pinches them into a skinny little part of the trail, but it looks really pretty. The only issue is if they're going through at night, I'm going to have to go out and look and see what like the house lights in the neighborhood look like, or if they're all going to shine through the trees, because I was out there in the afternoon. Right. But yeah, we'll get an idea. Maybe that will be a good spot to put up a trail camera.
Hey, we need to rewind because you said poker chip.
I don't know what.
How is a poker chip? Where do you find a poker chip?
I don't know what. It's like a VFW free drink chip that I must have found on the ground somewhere. And it was just, I was rummaging through trying to find like a thin piece of plastic, because the battery tray like goes on a little thing that slides up in, and then the door swings up and latches, but the tray can fall down into the door. So I had to put something that would push it up. I don't know where I found it, but threw that in there with a little piece of gaff tape, and it seems to get it to work since we're getting pictures. So maybe I'll have to peel it out of there and go get a drink later at the VFW. But for now, that's what I'm using. I think I had a piece of microfiber in there, but yeah.
Is that the most obscure thing you have in your bag? Is a old drink token?
I don't know. I probably have some fun things like a green laser pointer that you can do like crazy rainbow things. I usually keep those in my bag. If I'm ever like around a bird guide, I'll hand them out. If, in another country, they like to use those to point out stuff. That's not too weird though. It has a practical purpose.
Actually, why don't you talk about that? Because that is like that's a little cheat code kind of thing to have a laser pointer.
Yeah.
And talk about how you use it.
Sure. So, you can find them for like $10 or $15, but they're the green laser pointers that are really strong, not like the little red ones that you use to entertain a cat or something. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of, you have to be careful with them. You could shine them a mile away and trigger like a FAA to come investigate you if you're shining it in the sky. But it's what I use it for, or if a guide is using it, we're out birding in another country and they're more familiar with the birds, the calls, and it's really hard sometimes to get on a bird and be able to see what they're looking at. So utilizing this green laser, it's visible in the daylight unless it's super, super bright. And usually what I'll do is just start with it on the ground in front of us and just slowly trace it up towards the tree. And then, like you could go up the tree trunk and stop a couple feet below the bird so that you're not disturbing it. Because if you hit the bird or go close to it, it'll take off. It's definitely disruptive to them. But it's just a good, quick way to get someone to see what you're seeing without trying to say, all right, now look at this tree that's slightly yellower and it's a little bit below this one next to the rock. And, by that time, the thing's gone. So this is just a really good tool to do. It's about the size. Well, I probably have got a couple of them here.
That's such a good idea.
Just a little thing. This is the star tip, but yeah, it's rechargeable with a USB on some of them. Just uses the standard kind of rechargeable batteries and really helpful for birding.
That's awesome.
It is. It's a pretty good idea, right? He talked about it. I don't know. We were out in the field somewhere and I was like, that is a great idea, especially when you have somebody that, we're out in the woods all the time and you can pick up things pretty quickly, even if you're in somewhere different. Finding the shape of an animal or having those identifiers that we see every day, it's much faster. But you get someone that's not out there all the time, it really helps to be able to just use that and get them really close. And then they start developing that whole, okay, I need to look for this shape or I need to look for this habitat or whatever. And it helps a ton. A lot of times when we're out doing bears or moose or whatever in Alaska, and it's pretty far away with binoculars, you find yourself trying to find, you don't want to take your eyes off the animal if you got them in the binoculars, but then in the binoculars, you're trying to find some identifiable thing on some far ridge and be able to walk other people into or talk other people into it. And it gets to be a little, I don't know, if it's all of us that are in the same group and we're all kind of on the same page, it works pretty good. But you get somebody new that might not know all the little landmarks that you would use or your
I don't know.
terms that you're using.
You spotted that wolf, and you were like, Brandon, it's right by this log. And there's like, we're in Hallow Bay of all places, and there's logs everywhere.
Right. It's
And
tough.
I had one of those moments. I was like, is it in the sky?
Yeah, and that's just I think it comes with time with the finding stuff like that where you're just I don't know, you just get good at finding wildlife. But I've been doing it ever since I was a kid in a car, right? When you're just
Right.
a passenger and you have nothing else to do. And I grew up in rural Colorado where there's lots of wildlife on the roads. That's all if we drive to go visit my mom's parents, it's a 5-hour drive. And man, that's all I did is look for wildlife, which I
Yeah.
think pays off now just
Yeah.
because you get so used to looking for shapes and colors and just oddities that should probably not be there, but all of a sudden there's something there and you're like, oh, there's a rabbit or there's a bird or there's an elk or whatever it is.
Yep.
And then nobody else cared in the car. So I would just be like chalking it up to myself. I'm like, oh, look at that. Whatever.
Wildlife nerd.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yep. So let's see. Eric, you had a trip, and Michael was able to join you for a day or two, right?
Yeah.
You want
So
to talk
when he
about that?
was, to the end of October, Michael was getting ready to head back south. So I figured I'd just go ahead and follow him down. So we went a little ways into Canada, and I planned on detouring over to the coast back into Alaska to film eagles. There's a late gathering in November time at the river, and a ton of eagles in there. So Michael followed me into town, and um, the first I was probably took 13 days that I waited there before we got any snow, and that's really what I was hoping for. So that when Michael got there, it was still so warm that as we were driving into town, the yard still had green grass. It looked like spring, like the snow had melted and everything was coming back alive. So I wasn't super hopeful, but I had nothing going on. But after a little bit, he took off and I stuck around, sat through, I don't know, 3 or 4 days of just rain and wind and hoping the forecast was right, which it was. It finally paid off and got a little bit of snow. But yeah, so just spent like 16 days down there shooting mainly bald eagles, feeding on the chum salmon run. It's the river is pretty big and wide. It's probably a good half mile or more across, and the area where a lot of the salmon tend to be, where these rivers kind of congregate, it's a couple miles stretch, but with the warm temperatures, it's all wide open. And so the eagles are spread out. There's plenty of open areas and little channels where the salmon were getting kind of marooned up on the land. So there wasn't really a big need for fighting and competition, which is kind of what I've seen out of that area before. You get the fights, they swoop down and, jump in the air and flip and tackle. I saw a little bit of that, but it was really, I mean, they would fly down and land and they could just walk out and pull a salmon up and no one would bother them. They could feed for hours. And so it wasn't super dynamic stuff, but it allowed me to kind of see the whole environment and try and take it in a little bit better. The river bank's really neat because it's full of these huge mature cottonwoods, which I really like. They're just, massive 2-3 feet diameter trees. And that's why the eagles like that area, because those cottonwoods are huge and have all these perches. And so they'll hang out in that throughout the day. And then just big, massive snow covered mountains, all around the landscape's super pretty area. There's quite a few other species that were in there feeding on the salmon. A lot of gulls in that area. So there's still like short-billed gulls, glaucous-winged gulls. Ravens were all over feeding. They were fun to watch. Magpies were there. Steller jays feeding on the fish. When the salmon or the eagles would take off, everything would kind of run in and try and grab scraps. So it was fun to see what was happening. We did have a couple days where I saw a bear. I think they mainly go out at night because you would see tracks in the morning. The first, I think like the second day I was there, I saw one in the morning when it was still dark running across the road. And then the last day when there was snow, it was starting to warm up again, which is when I left. But the snow was falling out of the trees and like hitting my van. So I was waking up a lot throughout the night. And then finally, at one point, I felt the van like really shake. I'm like, all right, there has to be a bear out there. So tried to look out really quick. I didn't see it, but I could see its prints. So like, all right, he's out there. But went back to bed. And like an hour later, I could hear this like, rubbing sound on the corner of the van, and it's just sitting there rubbing against the corner of the van again. But the best part was it stuck around. So in the morning, I got up and got out to a good safe spot where I could kind of have an overlook of the area and got to watch it chase some fish around for I don't know, maybe 5-10 minutes before it called it for the day and went back up into the mountains. But yeah, that was kind of the highlight at the end after I saw that and got the snow, but the temperatures were warming up and everything was turning back to mud. I'm like, all right, I feel fulfilled. I think I can go ahead and call it. So that was when I took off.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So
it was
those
pretty cool
are the
experience.
eagles diving?
No, I
Or
mean,
are they just
it's
feeding on
pretty
the stuff that's washing
shallow.
up?
It's pretty shallow.
Okay.
I mean, there's deep channels, which I think is what stays open when things get really cold. But a lot of the areas, the salmon, there's all these little, I mean, it's like a glacial stream, so it's just heavily braided.
Oh,
And
okay.
a lot of these channels just kind of turn into thin little nothings. So the salmon would just run up in these little areas and basically just be marooned, stuck on their sides, still
Okay.
breathing, but they're like, I mean, they're way at the end of their life stage. So there wasn't much fight left in them either.
Yeah.
But yeah, the eagles could just walk out into the water and grab a
Okay.
fish and kind of like drag it back up on shore and eat. So it wasn't
Okay.
too crazy. Flying down
Well,
and
I've done
Michael.
that
grabbing
shoot
salmon or
when it
anything.
was late.
Mm-hmm.
I did that shoot when it was really late in the year, and there was the snow and there was the ice, and it was very cold. But that whole braided river system freezes up, except for really small little pockets that might be, 10 feet wide or 10 feet long and 2 or 3 feet wide. And there's salmon hanging out in those little pools because it is a deeper pool. And those eagles would do just that. They would just sit on the edges. And like Eric said, they're at the end of their life stage. So there's not a lot of fight in them, and those eagles can walk over and grab them. But in that situation, so there can be up to 3 to 4,000 eagles along the stretch of river. But it's how long, Eric? It's probably 20 miles, right?
Yeah, I mean, that whole river area is 20 miles, but I think within like that 3 to 4 mile area is kind of where the main, because I would drive out on either end when I was kind of just getting bored or needing to put some power back into my battery. And I didn't see much, but you would see like one or two scattered. But like over 3 or 4 miles was the main gathering, it seemed.
But I mean, it's just a ton of eagles, so it's cool.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
still.
if all the action is in one spot because of all the ice, that's when you get all this interaction between the birds where they'll sit a lot closer to the pools, so you get a lot closer. Because when we were there, you could look across this big old braided river, and you might be looking at 400 yards away, and you could count 200 or 300 or 400 birds.
Mhm.
I did when I was there, just sat in one spot and counted birds, but they're way far away. I mean, it makes for a cool shot
Right.
across the river, a panning shot or something, but it's not a dynamic shot. You really want that snow and ice, and then you get all the interaction. And when I was there, we saw swans. Did you see any swans there?
Yeah, there were swans. A pair
Yeah,
of
so that's
swans
cool
hung
too
out for
because
a
they'll use
while.
those little open areas too. And then the
Are they,
bears use them too. You'll see fresh bear tracks every night
Yeah.
that go up to those pools that are open. But it's such a weather dependent thing. And with everything happening over the last 10, 20 years, because I probably did it 15 years ago. There's just too much to do. It's so hard to
yeah.
return back to certain places. But
Yeah.
it has changed, and everything in Alaska was later this year. So, I mean, Eric could have stayed longer, but after you spend 2 weeks at a place and you're like, okay, maybe tomorrow or maybe in 3 days, it just starts wearing on you, and is a juice worth the squeeze, is what it
Yeah.
ends up becoming.
I was gonna say, I think I could stay longer if it wasn't like the sun's down by 3:30, your day's over by 3:30, and it's not going again until 9 the next morning. So from 3:30 till 9, it's completely pitch black because you're 20 miles away from town. So there's no light. It's overcast. It's dark. There's bears wandering around. It's not like you can go hang out outside. So you're stuck for my case, I'm stuck in the van, which is nice. It's better than like a tent or something. But yeah, it just kind of makes for long, uneventful days. If it was somewhere warm where you could just go sit out at night and have a fire or something, we could probably last longer. But I watched the weather, and it wasn't until like 2 or 3 days ago that they actually had another significant snowstorm. So had I stayed the rest of the month, I mean, I probably could have picked up some shots here and there, but all the snow was out of the trees, so it kind of loses that winter wonderland thing. It's just an inch or two of slushy snow on the ground. But now they got like a foot and a half of snow. So I see pictures of, a salmon that's in the water laying on its side, and it has a foot of snow piled up on top of it. It'd be kind of fun to go watch that, how the eagles would feed
It's
on there.
cool.
But talking to some people, they did think that by December time it starts to kind of thin out. And even people who were there for, locals that for 20 years have been going, they thought it seemed like it was starting to kind of die off when I left. So I don't know.
Hmm.
It'd be nice to be able to go back a little later, but I would definitely watch the weather and try and aim for a better window. I was going to say the one thing I did notice was that with the eagles that were coming close to the road, it seemed to be similar birds over and over. So I don't know if those are resident birds that are just more comfortable with it too. There was one that had a big scar, so it was pretty obvious it was the same bird, and that was the one that was probably there with its mate. Half the time I was shooting a bird close to shore, it was kind of one of those local pairs, probably, and they were pretty polite with each other. They weren't fighting much. The one would see the other one land, and it would just kind of waddle back and let the other one go in and feed. So they were maybe a little too nice to each other this year in the good conditions. But
Was I not paying attention, or did you say, was that a black bear or a brown bear?
it was a female brown bear. It was a brown bear. Yeah, good size one too, big chunky.
It's got to be because they're eating fish, right? So they're probably eating fish from September or August, even August through November. So
Yeah, I don't know
they
if they
probably
have
don't even hibernate till
that other run in maybe in July too that goes up those rivers. So I'm sure they're feeding heavy all summer long.
that whole southeast Alaska is got to be kind of cool to just hang out, and you can get around a little bit. We drove from Haines Junction all the way to Haines, which I don't remember, Eric. It was like 2 or 3 hour drive, and so you're leaving from Canada, going back into the U.S. Then you got to come back out that way unless you take a ferry. Now you could take a ferry over to Skagway. And Eric tells me, and I've never been over there, but in Skagway, he said the road that'll take you back out to the Alcan Highway from Skagway is probably one of the most beautiful roads in all of all of Alaska.
Hmm.
So, and then there's Hyder, right, which is a little further down. So there's all kinds of cool stuff. You could easily, if you're a van lifer or if you're just a trust funder that has all the money in the world and you don't need to have a job, it would be a really cool place to go from May till November or December. You could probably see different stuff and shoot different stuff and experience different things. But it would probably take a couple of years to really learn where you want to go, what time you want to be there, what time of year. I mean, it's endless. You can hopefully pull a lot of information off the internet, but it's such a vast area. It's going to be difficult to.
But yeah, even things that were like not necessarily a sure thing 5 years ago, but were pretty easy to get, are not happening anymore. So as much as you could spend a lifetime, it seems like in the last couple of years, some of my favorite things are kind of changing pretty rapidly. But yeah, hopefully that doesn't change too much.
The flip side to that is it's going to create new things, right? So what we got accustomed to is going to change. So there's going to be something else that comes in that's cool. And to the detriment of something else going away that was kind of cool too, right? But there's still going to be something. But it's what I said. It's like trying to identify what that is and where it's going to be, and is it filmable or photographable or.
I was just going to ask you, Eric, you were recording for YouTube, right? Or you were
Yeah,
attempting to. How
yeah,
was it
yeah.
being by yourself out there for 2 weeks?
It was fun. It was probably maybe for the best to try and put myself on camera and not have anyone around feel self-conscious about. Yeah, this is all new for me, the YouTube and editing videos and being on camera. So that's why I'm a little slow to get something out right now. I'm working on editing it. So I did shoot updates throughout, pretty much every day. And obviously I have all of my long lens footage to add to that. So I'll try and take you guys through the 2 weeks that I spent there and show you what I saw before the snow and after. And of course I logged all the bird species and things I saw. So hopefully I've got footage of all that. But yeah, it's hard to, I don't know, try to be authentic when I'm such a, I don't know, I don't have a lot of enthusiasm normally. Kind of just level most of the time, whether things are going really good or really bad. I don't get too worked up about it. But I was able to shoot with the new iPhone 15 Pro Max. I got that like the day before I left. And
Oh,
I
cool.
originally was shooting myself with the GoPro just a little bit. I set up my A7S3 for a couple intros, but then when I had to hike down to a couple different areas, I just had the GoPro and tried running with that. But it always, even trying to like shoot it flat, or maybe I need to adjust it some more, but it still looks a little too sharp. So I tried the iPhone in the Prolog in the log format, ProRes in log, and color graded that, and I think I like that a lot better. So I'll
That's
maybe
cool.
identify which camera I was using if people are curious to see, what they each looked like. But I just switched it up. I figured try and figure out, what workflow works best. My phone's always with me, but you record 10 minutes of yourself and that's like a 10 gigabyte file. So then trying to manage files on the phone and everything, you pretty much have to offload every day or you're going to load up a terabyte really quick. But I do like the quality of it.
Did you
So
try loading, or did you try recording to a hard drive yet?
no, I didn't. I should have. I didn't think about it, but I've used it
Yeah.
to offload footage onto a hard drive and then put it on the computer. And I've
Huh.
downloaded like my trail camera cards on there and then offloaded them. But I haven't done like the direct record too, which I think would be nice.
Yeah.
But I think the only way I'd want to do that is if I could either use like a MagSafe or some sort of attachment and have it like
Hmm.
it have to be somehow mounted on there. Which I've seen USB cables that
Yeah.
kind of go out of the bottom and right back to it. So maybe I'll look into it, but I don't know how much I'll
Huh.
be shooting with it. It was just kind of I figured a good test for it. I'd prefer to
A
have my
test.
Sony
Yeah.
anytime, I can, but when the big camera already gets the bag up to like 40, 45 pounds, you add another camera or
Hmm.
tripod and it just gets to be way too much to handle. And then, you'll see in the
Hmm.
video, of course, I'm standing there talking and there's fights going on behind me and like, all right, I got to pay attention now. I can't keep talking to you guys. So that was a trouble
That's just one
too.
of the hardest things about wildlife, like
It is.
YouTubing, I feel like, is there's so few moments that something happens that is like an elk not eating grass, right? And then they'll put their head up and start sparring, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I need to get this. And of course, it happens when you're talking. And so I can only imagine how frustrating that was, especially by yourself, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you guys both use the FX6?
Yep,
Does it have pre-record?
it
Yeah.
does. It's called pre-cache on the Sonys.
But how long is it?
I think you can do 30 seconds at 4K.
So there's your solve, right, for the
Yeah.
wildlife stuff. So if you're
Right.
trying to YouTube and
Which
stuff, you
worked.
just need to really rely on that.
Ironically, the one
Yeah.
time I left my camera recording for like 20 minutes and I turned around to like hit the record. I'm like, oh, never mind. It's still recording. Good thing I got that. But yeah, it's hard here.
I
It's
do it more often with the
distracting.
FX6 for
Go ahead.
whatever reason. I don't know. And it even has like a tally light. It lights up the record button. I don't know. But I do that more often with the FX6 than I do any other camera for some reason.
What's that? Hit record and don't know that you hit record, or hit stop and don't know that you hit stop?
Yeah. And I think it comes down to the screen. On all my other cameras, you can do the emphasized recording, and it will put a red screen around your,
A
like,
red square?
it's on the outside of the square, right? And well, now I'm gonna have to look at it, but I don't think it
Yeah, I
has
don't
that.
think it does, but I don't know.
And so maybe that's, I don't know.
I think my problem is I'm wearing gloves or mittens to stay warm, and I think I hit the button. I feel something, but I just didn't actually hit it. And then I look away to see some
Yeah.
other thing happen, and it's just rolling away.
So here's a problem in the red world. So if you're using a helium, so it's an 8K Super 35 camera,
Yep.
you can get the 30 seconds, which is awesome. And for
That's amazing.
wildlife, it's awesome. And a lot of times, if I'm shooting a project for, I don't know, BBC or whoever, in their notes that they send out before we ever go out and do a shoot, they will give you all the parameters. So they're giving you all the color space, they're giving you everything. But one of the things that they'll put in there is do not pre-record from, and I've seen it all over the place, but never more than 10 seconds. And most of the time they're like, we will not accept pre-recorded stuff that's more than 6 seconds. So you still
Really?
got to be kind of Johnny on the spot to make sure your focus is not taken away for more than 6 seconds, because you could potentially miss that shot if it's one of those shoots. But with one of those shoots, I'm not going to be paying attention to a GoPro talking to YouTube.
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
actually shooting that thing. The downside to the new Raptor is the file size is so big. And then I think it probably has a lot to do with the media that we're recording to. So with the helium, it's using a proprietary red magazine or
Okay.
card.
Yep.
And those are very fast. So I think that means they can record a lot faster. They can record all that info that and keep it going in a cache. With the new ones, it's more like a, what do they call it? Compact flash card. And you have to buy proprietary versions of that as well that are a little bit faster. But it's not from Red. They're coming from a different company, which is good because then it brings the price down. But I'm wondering if that, yeah, there's a Red magazine that Brandon's holding up now. And all it is I think it's just a RAID setup with a bunch of small SSD things inside that card. But the downside with the Raptor is I'm lucky to get, and it all depends on your frame rate. It all depends on your frame size. It all depends on so many variables. But I hate it. I can't get more than like 2 or 3 seconds
Whoa.
of pre-record. And the problem with that is if you're long lens and if you have your little trigger, whether it's on the camera or on your tripod handle, inevitably, no matter how careful you are, you're adding a little bit of shake. So in the helium days, and I still shoot the helium, so I'll still use it, but I would know, okay, I'm running a 10-second pre-record. So if I see something happen, I'll count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and before I hit the record button, because I'll know that shake that I'm going to introduce is going to be after what I really want, and then it's great.
Right.
But when you only have 2 or 3 seconds on a pre-record, then you're just going to get the shake. Now the good side is all this post-production, all these tools with Resolve or Premiere or Final Cut, you can take that shake out pretty easily. So it's easy to be way too detail driven out in the field where you're trying to be perfect, right? You just want it to submit the best stuff. And if you can't do it, you just got to get past that and say, oh, you know what, they'll just fix it in post, which I hate.
Right.
You don't want to rely on that. You want it to be perfect.
Right.
And there's workarounds. I mean, you could take, so I run a little cable trigger release on the Red. So if I'm going to be in one place, if I'm in a hide or if I'm in a blind or a hide, or if I'm somewhere where I'm, could stand in the same spot and shoot, then you could always just take that trigger off of the tripod. So it's just the cable is in your hand and it's loose. That would eliminate the shake. So I don't know. I don't know how we ended up down that rabbit hole, but it's just stuff to think about, and it's stuff to ponder when you're out there doing the wildlife stuff.
Yeah, it would be with the Sonys. I usually let it run the entire sequence. So I'd have to change my workflow. Like if I run a 20-second with like cars, right? Cars are an easy one because if there's a corner you want, then I'd set it up as a pre-cache and I would just let it, okay, it takes them 20 seconds to get through that. And then I just let the 20 seconds roll, hit the record button. They're in and out of it and there's no shake.
Yep.
But with only 6 seconds, I mean,
Yeah.
most of those clips are going to be more than 6 seconds, right?
Well, with wildlife especially, right? But
Yeah.
with car stuff, I mean, you're
Yeah,
gonna
with cars, yeah.
people have this much attention span, so you're only
Right.
going to use 3 seconds of it anyway, at the
Right.
most, right? So it's just a big kind of like whatever you're editing or whatever you're producing, and whoever your audience is and what they're tolerating, what keeps
Yeah.
the people watching
Yep.
is it's the big. That's the talent you need to have.
So is the V Raptor? I guess the big thing there was 8K 120, right?
Yep.
And then the cards switched on you.
Yeah, so it's a compact flash, but it's still proprietary. I think it's what is it, Angelbird, or
Okay.
I think you got to get the cards from those guys. Now I
Yeah,
did
and this.
try. I had a problem this year
Oh
where
yeah.
I have two 2 terabyte cards for the Red Raptor, and these things have. I mean, there's always gremlins, right? So I had shot both cards, and I'm super bad about saying, "Yep, I shot that card. Format it." And I'll get out in the field, and I'll be like, "Did I download this
Yep.
card?"
Yep.
Everybody, I'm sure, has this problem.
Yep.
You need to be able to just turn on the camera right after you download and right after you back it up in 2 or 3 places and format that card so that when you're in the field, you're always starting fresh. But I don't do that, right? You just put it back in your card wallet and you go out in the field. Well, in this particular situation, I didn't even put it back in the card wallet. I set it on the table, both 2 terabyte cards. And I get out in the woods. We just hiked 10 miles and finally found something to shoot. I open up my card wallet and I'm like, oh no, my red cards are not in any. I don't have them anywhere, but I did have a SanDisk, one of the fast. What do they call it? Extreme or whatever they call
Yep.
SanDisk.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, I'm here, and I'm not going to run back and get a card and come back and have this still be here. So I'm going to try it. You put that media in the Red Raptor, and it says we strongly. This is what I'm saying. It's not what the actual
Right.
word is, but we urge you or we strongly recommend you use a red card because if you're not using an actual red card, then you may not get any of your recordings. But I had no choice. So I went ahead and did it, and it worked. It was fine. It actually recorded to the card, and you get that little warning message, but didn't have a choice, and I tried it, and it worked. So that's kind of cool to know that in a pinch, say you were out shooting a project and you did fill up 2 cards,
Mm-hmm.
you could, and you didn't have any more of the red cards, you could still get your stuff.
Man.
But yeah, that's the difference. I mean, the Red Raptor has RF mount, which is kind of cool because you can use all the new RF lenses if you want to. I prefer not to because with the RF-DF adapter, then I can put neutral density in.
Yep.
If I'm going straight RF to RF, then I don't get that ability to put the
Right.
neutral density in the middle. So then now I'm putting on a matte box on the end or some sort of neutral density on the end of the lens. So if you're using a smaller lens, you could use a variable. But then with variables, as everybody knows, you can end up with all kinds of problems if you're not using a really good one. So, it's not a perfect solution, and I don't know why they went with that RF mount. It probably just keeping up with the times, and everything's changing, and the EF has been kind of they're not making EF lenses anymore, so maybe that's the reason.
Well, and it has the PL mount that you can swap, right?
Well, it's just an adapter.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
Yeah. So it works. And anytime I go out and shoot an actual project, most of the time if they're sending you a lens to use, it's usually a PL mount. So
it's like a PL mount CN20.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
And then with those, you most likely are going to run a matte box.
Right.
But the cool thing about, especially Alaska, is a lot of times there's not a lot of sun. So you really don't have to rely too much on ND you'll get those occasional days, but for wildlife, we're always shooting early and late mostly.
Right.
So you can get away without ND for a lot of it. And then you can cheat your settings a lot just to to stay within the range that you want to stay in.
Right.
And the good thing about the CN20 or the 50-1000 is it's not a really fast lens. I think it
It's
goes
like
down to
6.3 or something.
5.6.
Okay.
I think 5.6 at wide at 5 or at 50.
Okay.
But when you get up to 1,000, it's f8.
Okay.
And then it doesn't make that f8 jump till right towards the end. So I think even at 600 or 700, you still have a little bit faster lens. But
I think
when
the
you go all
Mac
the
is
way,
agreeing with you. It's giving you thumbs up, little bubbles next to your head.
man, there's got to be a way to turn that off because we are going to look ridiculous when we're doing this stuff. There's got to be a way to turn it off, right?
Does it work when I'm on a non-Mac camera? I don't think. Oh, it
Yep.
does.
Yeah.
Well, there's all kinds of cool things that you can do.
Yeah.
That it usually works. Oh, yeah, there it is. I mean, I don't know why they introduced. I don't know.
There's got to be
You
a
always
way
got
to
to have
shut that
something
off.
new, I guess. Yeah, we're gonna have to
Keep
figure
your
that out. If anyone
business
knows, can you
more exciting?
just comment below and help us out?
Yeah.
I got us sidetracked. So the last episode,
The one that we didn't record?
the one that you guys
didn't
recorded,
record?
you did the assignment. I yeah. We talked about our favorite podcast because you guys were talking about travels, and I want to hear about your trip from Alaska back down to Denver. But what did you listen to? Like, what was a podcast that got you through there? Any podcast, doesn't have to be YouTube or wildlife related.
Oh man, I listen to so many different things. I do a lot of the meat eater trivia just because it's always wildlife trivia kind of things and cooking and that kind of stuff. So I do wildlife cooking or wild game cooking.
Yep.
So I do that. And then in the process of that, they actually had Rob Lowe on a meat eater podcast. And I'm like, this is nuts. I don't know anything about Rob Lowe, or I wouldn't place him in some sort of like outdoor world podcast.
Right.
And it was actually pretty interesting. And he does do a lot of like deep sea fishing and that sort of thing. So that was his tie into that world.
Okay.
But at the end, he talked about his own podcast. And I'm like, he has his own podcast. So I was bored and I didn't have a lot of stuff to listen to. And I think I just entered Montana. So I still had, I don't know, 16 or 18 hours of driving. So I downloaded it and it's actually kind of cool. I listened to a lot of Rob Lowe and he had a variety of guests. And as with all podcasts, I'll go through and I'll usually use the title or the guest as my, that's what I'm going to determine whether I'm going to download it. Like I could care less talking or listening to anything about acting.
Right.
But he had Sammy Hagar on one. And I grew up with Sammy Hagar, right? So I'm like, oh, that'd be cool to listen to old Sammy and see what he has to say. So it ended up, he had a good interview with Michael Douglas, which was super interesting. So I did a lot of that. I downloaded like 3 or 4 books and I was in a hurry when I did it. So I just, Audible, is it Audible? Yeah. Audible will just send you like, oh, if you listen to this, you might like this.
Right.
Man, every one of them was a bust. I couldn't get into any of them
really?
on the drive. Yeah. So
bummer.
that was a bummer. So, and then I listened to another podcast that actually Eric is going to recommend. So I won't say anything about it, but
yeah,
that one I really like. And actually I talked about that one in my, if I get this YouTube video edited about the drive down, I was actually talking about that podcast because there's nothing better than having a good podcast to listen to when you got all this great scenery. Time flies by. So it's kind of nice to have it.
Do you ever find yourself turning down the music so you can see better?
I don't ever listen to music anymore. It's
or like
podcasts.
Turn down the podcast so you can see better. Like there's always that moment where I'm like, okay, where am I going? And I have to turn down the music so I can see what I'm doing. It's the most ridiculous thing ever.
Yeah, that is ridiculous. I agree with that.
Yeah. How about you?
No, I don't do that, but I don't have any good. Like if you get into Eric's van, he's got this fancy audio system and he's always sounds really good. And you'll find out as we talk over these podcast episodes that Eric is very much into audio. So it's always good. And you go into his house, he's got a great surround system. I'm the guy who will listen to it off the speaker on the TV. So
Me too.
It doesn't ever factor in. So Eric, what was the podcast that you recommended on the episode that
so back when we were out we were out filming moose, we had a friend who actually someone that Michael's worked with recommended to both of us. What was it? Trying to remember the official name. Natural Wonders, the Plodcast. It's Plodcast, Plodcast. I think it's out of the BB or out of the UK somewhere, if I remember correctly. But they just have good interviews with different people in the industry, and that's what I listen to on a good part of my drive down. I'm just trying to get some inspiration and hear people talk about kind of how they get into the industry. I find that to be super helpful. Kind of what allowed me to see an opening in realizing that you just have to go for it. So those stories were good, and then just hearing people's process, how they shoot and film. I think the one specific one that I mentioned when we recorded before was the one with Jamie McPherson. The big bulk of his talk is how he really pushed for gimbal stabilized camera rigs to be used in film, and they didn't really want to use them or utilize them. They thought it'd be kind of hokey or it wouldn't hold up to rough terrain, but he convinced them, and obviously now that's a massive part of the industry and the wildlife sphere, especially. But him talking about, I think that's probably an interesting topic, and I don't have my thoughts fully fledged out on it, but I see at least the Instagram trend for photography is kind of wide and close, and he kind of pushed back on that, saying that he didn't really think that it made you feel like you're in the environment. And the biggest piece that I took out of it that I tried to utilize while I was down in Haynes is he would say while he's sitting in the field, he would look around and basically try to say, what can I shoot to make someone feel like they're sitting here? What do I need to include that puts you in this environment? And so I tried to utilize that, but in his mind, if he's following animals or trying to use something that's this big wide thing, it's not really our perspective, and it didn't quite feel like you're there with the animals. So I've had some conversations on social media that I've seen. I don't know if you guys noticed that trend or not, where you're kind of, everyone's trying to shoot really wide but really close to the subject, and at some point there's going to be what's an appropriate level of getting close to that subject. But he tend to go more for the long lens, let them do their thing. He can make you feel like you're kind of there following a cheetah into a hunt with the long lens still, and trying to use that perspective of like, how can I still make you feel like you're there in that environment? You're crawling through the grass at eye level, I need to be shooting that, or different perspectives. So sitting in the big cottonwood trees, I'm like, all right, well, these things are iconic. This is one of the big reasons why these eagles can use this area, is because of all these roosts. The salmon are the main thing that everyone's here feeding on, so focusing on these critical components of the environment and trying to include those. But yeah, that was a good podcast. Otherwise, I just listen to a lot of comedy podcasts, things that just kind of light and just fun. I don't know. I have some comedians that I'm fans of, and I'll follow those. But a lot of them talking about getting into how they kind of started, and their journeys, I think are inspiring as well. So maybe Rob Lowe's actors interviews would be good for that same thing. It's just a matter of doing and not giving up. But Brandon, you got any favorites?
I read Blue Bear while I was out on the road. The family and I went down to South Padre Island for Thanksgiving. It's a big part of the South Texas birding area, so there was a ton of birds down there. I got to see my first spoonbill, and so we were down there, and I read Blue Bear because we had a ton of weather days. And I listened to the podcast. There what used to be a Visual Revolutionary one. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. There's a bunch of good ones. I like Casey Anderson's Wild Tracks. Yeah. He had the other one. It was called Sidetracked, right?
Mm-hmm. That's what he started out with. Yeah, I think so.
Yep. And so his new one's been fun. He's done some guys, just some interesting individuals. And I can't remember his co-host, but she's out of Jackson. But they've had some people on with the Patagonia pumas. There's been some moments where he's just talked about, like, they had a snake that came through their little recording area when they were at the Jackson what is that film festival called in Jackson Hole?
I
I'm
think it's
trying to
called
say here.
Jackson Wild or something like that.
Yeah,
It's
there
the
you go.
gathering I think it's every 2 years. The wildlife film industry gathers there.
Yeah, that one. And they had some great people on at that point in time. So they had Ben Masters on, who we know. So that was pretty cool just to hear them. And then I like mysterious things. And so there's this guy named his name's John B. Allen, and he was a Navy SEAL. And he was coming out of the SEAL training, or out of his, sorry, not his training, his duty. And he was going to go back into the natural world, and he was trying to figure out, what am I going to do? Like, I've been taught to kill people. How do I apply that to the main world? And he ended up meeting up with some people in New York, and they built a program called Elite Meet, and it was for fighter pilots and special operators, so like Navy SEALs. And so he built this, and he got everyone that showed up to this first one a job except for himself. And so he ended up running the company and helping that whole process. Well, he got rid of that, and he started telling stories on YouTube. And so he'll just find this obscure story about a serial killer or Bigfoot or a noise in the woods, and he just tells it really well, and I love it. And it's been incredible to watch it. So I found him when he was like 100,000 subscribers, and now he has like 6 million subscribers. It's absolutely nuts, just by telling stories. He has no original.
What is the name of it?
It's called Mr. Ballin, because his name's John B. Allen, right? So he uses B. Allen as Ballin, and it's just Mr. Ballin. And now he has 2 podcasts. There's a podcast named Run Fool, which is like it's all fictitious, I believe, but it's like stories where you're like, okay, run away, fool, right? And it's suspenseful. His other one is just the Mr. Ballin podcast, and it's the same, just stories without visual effects like the YouTube. The visual effects on YouTube are just all stock footage, best I can tell. And that's how he's made this entire thing. He just sits there in front of a green screen, and they put stuff up behind him or overlay it, and he's killed it on YouTube. So for me, that goes to show you how important a well-told story is when seeing people. Because I mean, he's grown that to millions of followers. So pretty cool. But he has a podcast that I would listen to, and it had some fun stuff on it. Serial killers and Bigfoot and aliens and, oh gosh, here we go again. We got into this last time. Hold on, I brought something though. So he talks about Bigfoot and stuff. And I'm not one, like, I've been out in the woods a lot. And I don't know, I have a hard time believing in Bigfoot. But he tells these stories where if I was, okay, like, go listen to his stories. Like, they're incredible. But to like summarize one, these kids are lost for like 2 weeks. And then they come back and the police are interviewing them. And they're like, where did you go? And they're like, oh, the big gorilla man grabbed us. And it's like, what? And they're gone for 2 weeks, but they come back and they're like perfectly fine. So like, what happened? Did like this big hairy, I guess a person like me probably grabbed him, right, and fed him. But like, it's just one of those things, like, you think about it, and I'm traveling by myself. So I'm like, if I saw an alien, like, no one's with me. If I start telling like Michael, Eric, I saw an alien, you guys are gonna be like, okay, dude, right? Like, you just go crazy. So it's just interesting to hear those stories. So, okay.
Well, I told the story on the last pod. Don't take that off. You can
Say we might need
the rest of the episode.
No, I can't do
our,
it.
thumbnail. With that on there.
Oh yeah, do you need a thumbnail?
I photographed Bigfoot.
Oh yeah, tell us that story.
Yeah. So, and it was actually, so it was a marketing thing, right? So there was a company I was shooting for, and they were going to sponsor an event up in the Pacific Northwest, and they wanted to. When everybody thinks about Pacific Northwest, you think about Bigfoot.
Yep.
Or a lot of people do.
Yep.
So they came up with the idea is, let's get a really nice, really authentic Bigfoot costume or I don't even know what else you would call it. I guess it's a costume.
It's costume, yeah.
And then we'll get him out there in the woods, and we'll just do that really obscure, kind of blurry, kind of far away. Could it be? Could it not be? And we'll just shoot a bunch of little clips. Like, for example, we had one where there was a guy fishing in this little stream, And then I told the guy who was wearing the Bigfoot outfit, I said, just go up about, I don't know, 50, 75 yards. And I want you to just walk through the background. Just obscured. I want just kind of see, it's just that question mark, right? Like,
Yep.
oh my God, I just saw Bigfoot, but I'm not sure. But I think
Right.
to this day, I still get people sending me those clips because they're still running around the internet, and people are legitimate. Like, did you see this one?
It's amazing.
You know, and it was just, now it was a legit. I think they spent like $20,000 on this costume, so it's
Whoa.
really legit. And super tall. Eric would be great. If nobody's ever met Eric in person, he's a really tall guy. I don't know what he's,
Yeah.
6'4",
Yeah.
6'5", or 6'6",
6'5".
or
Yeah.
he's tall. So
6'5".
Eric would be
6'5".
perfect in this costume because they built it, or they made it so it was super big. The guy that I had was kind of a shorter guy, but he had some construction stilts that he could wear inside of it to really make him super tall. The problem with that is he was good on flat ground, but we were out in the woods and he couldn't walk out in the woods on those construction stilts and stay upright. And when you fall, you're falling a long way. I mean, your head is 10 feet off the ground, right? So if you hit wrong, it's going to leave a mark. So a lot of the shots we had to do were, you couldn't show the whole body of Bigfoot because it looked like a little squatty, short Bigfoot, which wasn't really true. But that was a fun one to do. And then after that whole thing, they ended up using that costume everywhere because we would go to other events. Like this client used to sponsor the Bassmaster Classic tournament. So they would have this, and we ended up finding this really tall guy, 6'4", 6'5", or whatever, to wear it. And he put on a t-shirt that had the emblem for the company. And then everybody wanted a picture with this person or with this costume.
Bigfoot.
Yeah. And so you got the logo of the company that's appearing all over social media on Bigfoot. So it was a perfect advertising thing, or marketing thing.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I have pictures of that Sasquatch out, or Bigfoot out cruising on a bass boat. You know, I got him walking through town. I mean, I just got all these obscure shots of a pretty authentic looking Bigfoot, which is kind of cool.
That's our thumbnail.
But I
We'll
think
have to include some of those.
I believe that I believe people are out there having really random experiences that could be mistaken as Bigfoot. But a lot of the times when you're hearing a Bigfoot story, a lot of it is the audio, right? And a lot of times it's at night and they're like, oh, we heard this noise. And there's no way it was anything but a Bigfoot.
Yeah.
But all you got to do is spend time out in the woods with this really weird stuff. Like, I don't know if you all have ever heard of lynx, but a lynx can make some sounds that you would not imagine coming out of an animal. And I think there's a couple of owls out there that make these really funky sounds.
Fox.
There's moose that make sounds that if you weren't familiar with a moose, you could be like, what in the heck was that? So I don't know. I just think it's a lot of that. And with today's trail camera technology, if there's a Bigfoot, it's going to get caught. But so one of the reasons I listened to the Sammy Hagar interview is it turns out that Rob Lowe and Sammy Hagar are very, very much into this dimension thing. And I don't know anything about it. I get it. I kind of understand it. What is it? Yeah. Is there one dimension for every number? Or is there only so many dimensions? Like they talked a lot about like the 9th dimension. Is that true? Or am I remembering wrong?
Yeah, there's multiple dimensions supposedly, but they all like,
yeah,
it's hard to quantify. So like a 4th dimension, right? If you were to take like a point and push it through a 3-dimensional world, it will show up as a orb coming through our world. It's all very weird, and my brain doesn't comprehend it very well.
Right. See, but they went off on some serious tangents with that kind of stuff, which was kind of interesting. And so if that's the case and if that's reality, then okay, maybe it does happen. I don't know. I think
so supposedly the 9th dimension is time. In physics, time is any mathematical model that fuses the 3 dimensions of space and the 1 dimension of time into a single 4-dimensional space continuum.
Yeah.
Perfect.
went
Got
right
it.
over my head. Put your hat back on.
Yeah, no kidding. Just okay. So there's a ninth dimension. The 104th dimension is my favorite, though.
Oh, have you ever been down to the San Luis Valley and there's a whole alien like campground?
Oh gosh,
So
do
the
you want to
San
hear?
Luis Valley is in Colorado. It's in south central Colorado, kind of close to the New
Yep.
Mexico border. It's a great big huge valley that's surrounded by mountains. Super dark because it is pretty remote. And if you cruise down, I can't remember the highway. It's across from the sand dunes. So if you go to the sand dunes, I
Right.
think it's a national park or national monument. I don't know
Yep.
which one it is.
Yep.
Across from that, there's something I can't even remember the name of it, but it's got an alien outlook tower. It's got all kinds of stuff, and so it's kind of fun to go and photograph there because it is kind of cool. But there's a lot of believers that go down there to try to intercept some alien type uh, viewings or just moments, I guess.
It's like out by Alamosa, right?
Yeah, north of Alamosa,
Yep.
probably 40 miles or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if anybody's into it, you definitely want to. And I think there's an alligator farm out there too, because
Yeah,
there's
I've been
some
to the
natural hot
alligator farm.
springs,
Yep.
natural hot springs that come out of the ground and they raise alligators out there.
Hmm.
It's just a funky place. That whole area
Sounds
is
like
kind of
it.
funky. It's kind of funky in a cool way.
Yeah.
That alligator farm, I think, is pretty close to a place where you can stay, and they have like a nice pool, and it's pretty cool if you're going to the sand dunes. So
Well, that
check it out.
whole Southwest has got a lot of that kind of stuff. Because if you get into, there's a place in New Mexico called Socorro, New
Yep.
Mexico.
Yep.
Did you guys ever see that movie called Contact?
Oh yeah, with
It's
the
pretty
big
old.
the
They got the
aliens.
great big satellite dishes.
Uh-huh.
There is one of those. What do they call it? The Very Large Array, and it's a bunch of satellite dishes that are set up on railroad tracks. So the array that they can, so they're looking at deep space through. I think it's not visual. It's more of like I think it's audio. I don't remember. There's something that
Hmm.
they send out of these antennas, but the different configurations let them see different distances. But it's pretty freaking cool. And so it's not necessarily aliens, but it's tying into that sort of genre of coolness. And I went out there one time. It's really close to Bosque del Apache, right? So I used to go to
Mhm.
Bosque del Apache all the time to film the sandhill
The
crane
cranes,
migration.
yeah.
And then there'd always be, there might be, I don't remember the exact numbers, so don't hold me to it. But let's say there's like 10,000 sandhills and there might be 20,000 snow geese. And this is pretty dang cool to see
Yeah.
a flock of snow geese at 20,000 take off. It's just the sound is cool, and just seeing all these birds in the air is cool. I mean, you hear all these stories in the old times where the sky was darkened by birds. It's kind of like that. But I went down there one year, and it's only probably like an hour away to get to these satellite dishes. And I was with two buddies, and they're like, "No, I don't want to go over there." So I went over there by myself, and I was very much into stock photography at this point. So I thought, oh,
Okay.
if I can get over there and get some cool stock photos, because it was kind of when satellite dishes were the big thing. When remember how you used to get cable TV? Well, they still do it with dishes with DirecTV or whatever.
Right.
But I thought, well, there might be some use for stock photos if I could get some cool photos. So I went over there and I'm by myself. It was I went really early in the morning, and it just so happened that they had all these. I don't know, I remember how many dishes they have, but there's several. Let's say there's 8 to 12 of these monsters. I mean, these are 10 stories tall. They're huge.
Yeah.
And they're on railroad tracks, so they can move them around and create these different configurations to point the signal up into one particular spot. But when I got there, the sun was just breaking. When the sun kind of first starts coming up and you get that really pretty colors in the sky, where you might have a little orange band, or you'll have, and then down in New Mexico, you get really cool sunsets or sunrises and sunsets, anyways, if there's any clouds in the sky. So I was down there and I parked, and you can walk out there pretty close to them, and they had them all lined up in a row. And as soon as I got there, I was looking up at them. I'm like, it's just cool to see, right? Because it's just this
Mhm.
massive thing, and there's a bunch of them. I don't know if there's somebody in a control tower that was watching me, or if I just hit the timing right. But the minute I got there and I started looking up at them, they all started moving in unison. So
That's
they
so
were like,
cool.
"Bzzz," and then they'd go, "Bzzz," and then they'd go up, and they were all perfectly timed together. And it's like,
That's
it's
amazing.
aliens. Yeah,
But
it
you were
was like,
looking up at it.
yeah. And I'm like totally by myself. I'm like, oh, this is kind of freaky. But that
That's
was
so
a
cool.
serious rabbit hole. But if you're ever done at Bosque, I would highly recommend a day or two to go over there to film it, or just to see it, because it's just, and they use those dishes in that movie called
Right.
Contact.
Right. Yeah, because the aliens they made contact or something with aliens, right? That was the whole
Yeah,
premise. Jodie
yeah,
Foster, right?
I think so. Yep.
Crazy.
So anyhow,
Well, that was a rabbit hole, wasn't it?
for sure.
Uh, if you've, let's see. Well, like some of the birds, you mentioned that. Like there was a grackle down there, and grackles make the weirdest noises. They don't. So we have grackles here in Colorado, but they don't make the noises that the ones down in Texas do. And so we were woken up by one making like this alarm sound, and it scared the crap out of Dean. Am I allowed to say crap on podcasts?
Yep.
Okay.
And you need to tell people who Dean is.
Oh yeah, Dean is my little 7-year-old. He's a monster right now, so like we don't have to worry about other things because they're scared of him. He's awesome though. But yeah, he was terrified that something was outside because this thing is making this like siren-y noise and like moving around the camper. So yeah, he was terrified of it. But the grackle is something that I learned can make a lot of noises, much like a raven. But
Yeah, that's cool.
So Eric, you've been all over the world doing birds. You've probably
Mhm.
heard all kinds of cool sounds out of birds, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any real big favorites. Trying to think of what I'm drawing a blank now. Put me on the spot.
Aren't the birds of paradise? Don't they have a bunch of just really
They have a lot
different
more like
calls?
display dancing and stuff than calls.
Yeah,
There's
but
a
the displays are the most
yeah, the displays
awesome
are
part of
cool.
the whole thing. But don't they with the display have certain sounds where you're like, holy
Probably,
moly,
yeah,
that
like
just came out of a
clicking
bird.
sounds and stuff. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
well, and the
I mean,
bird
there's
that I
like
was
the
thinking,
snipe and stuff are cool.
yeah,
The Wilson snipe, they fly up and their call, if you want to say that, is, the wind passing over their tail feathers. And you get this really cool winnowy sound as they're kind of like swooping down through the sky. And those are always cool. And it's kind of a haunting, like eerie little whoo through the sky. If you had no idea what it was, it'd be kind of a weird thing. And then to think that it's just sound or wind vibrating tail feathers is even cooler. But um, yeah, I don't know.
have you ever heard
It's
a shoebill stork?
a shoe bill. Yeah, yeah, I've seen one in Uganda.
And they make that machine gun noise with their bills.
It didn't. Yeah, like is that when they kind of like shake their bill funny or
Yeah, and
something?
it'll make like it
Yeah,
makes a machine gun sound. It's crazy.
yeah. Ours, the ones that we
While we're
saw
on this
didn't.
whole topic, we should mention, I don't know if you all use that Merlin app.
Oh yeah.
That Merlin app has a lot of these sounds. So if you're ever like out in the woods and you see a bird and you hear a sound, you can a lot of times go if you can identify the bird. And it's good at helping you identify birds too. But you can, if you do identify it, there's usually audio that goes along with it, which is kind of cool. But they don't have a whole library. Like some birds make so, like a raven.
Yeah,
We talked about that on the last podcast too. I think Eric's up there in a really great place to interact and film ravens. Um, some of the sounds, the arsenal of sounds that they have is, I don't even know if you can even quantify how many different sounds a raven has. But and I'm sure if you went to the Merlin app, there wouldn't have every sound
No.
that a raven can do.
yeah. Merlin's really cool. I think Merlin's put out by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and I'm pretty sure that's the app that you can record audio and it'll tell you what bird, like what it's hearing, and also if you have a picture, you can put it in there and it'll try to give you a best guess. But all of that has been kind of trickled down from eBird, which is the site that I use to log all my sightings. So it's developed now in its newest form as an app. The easiest one to use, just an app. You go in, hit start if you want it to track, so it knows where you are GPS wise, how far you went. So they like to know your effort that you put in for your list. So someone that's standing in one spot for 10 minutes only sees a couple things versus hiking for, a couple hours over miles. It just changes their data, but it's all basically like a citizen science type project where, you go and you report what you've seen and how many of each bird you've seen, and they can track the statistics of what, is moving around. But if you're devoted enough to photograph the birds, then you would upload that photo under that bird species. So now they have 20,000 images that have already been identified as an American robin or whatever species, and then they can just feed that through. So as more and more people submit audio and still images of these birds, they can keep training it. So where Merlin started off with, maybe just like the top 20 most common birds in the area, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But it's all just through utilizing the Macu library that Cornell uses. And you can go in there and find tons and tons of audio recordings if you really want to go through. It's basically like the stock of all of that sort of recording, and it'll say who recorded it, where, and when. So a lot of birds have regional dialects. There's oftentimes where I'll hear something in another state and I have no idea what it is, and it's really just a common bird, but they just have a completely different call. Or it's kind of like us with accents in different parts of the country, and it's definitely develops in the bird world too. And so it's fun to, when you do go in to listen to calls, ideally you would want to pick one that's recorded close to your area. But even in that, there can be a lot of variability. But yeah, Merlin's a good one if you're just getting started. And then, of course, I suggest utilizing eBird just to keep track, because, for me, one of the earliest birds that kind of got me addicted was something that was really rare. And I'm glad that I had that logged in there now so that I can go back and see, when the exact date I saw it, and I can go right to my pictures or go onto a map and see how many bird species I've seen and all the different ones. So what in the birding world you call it a spark bird, pretty much kind of what sparked your interest in birds. And I was somewhat interested in ducks just because that's what was easily available for me to photograph, trying to identify what they were. But I started seeing reports of a bird, a red-throated pipit, which isn't very common in Anchorage.
Oh, yeah.
In some new park that I had never heard of. And I'd only been in the state for like a year. And so I went down there, and a couple guys were out birding, but I didn't really chat with them. One had a little kid and the other was like way out in the mud flats. All of a sudden they start screaming and yelling, and the one's calling the other one over the phone, and I can hear both their conversations. And the one, I had a Canon, a 500 f4, so big lens. And he's like, "You get over here right now," and yelled. I run over there. He's like, "Photograph that bird." And he grew up in Japan, and it was a Siberian stone chat. And so he was really familiar with them as like a childhood bird, and the behavior, caught his attention, just the way it would land on a stick and fly down and grab stuff. And it just didn't register as a local bird. And so he caught his attention. And yeah, that was kind of one of my spark birds, within probably 5 minutes of that bird being photographed, there were just probably 30 people running out in this park. There's women in like full dresses and heels just running through like a fall day, muddy grass to see this bird. If you follow anything in birding world, the big year stuff, Neil Hayward had a record, I think, well, it was whatever that year was, maybe like 2008. And he landed in Anchorage like maybe 20 minutes after this bird was spotted. And of course, someone's like at the airport, grab him off the plane and drive him straight there so he could see it.
Wow.
I was like, what is this world? And that's the birding world. So that kind of got me hooked, where like, all right, I got to feed off this energy and keep going and seeing what I can find. And so that was a really cool bird, the Siberian stone.
Well, and it happens in every state too. Like every state has those moments. So it's something that anyone can do.
So Eric, is that what got you into photography in the get-go? Was the birding, or was the photography there before the birding?
Yeah, just like I bought the first DSLR when we moved to Alaska in 2009, and I was just into the animals, big game sort of stuff. Figured I would see, bears and moose and go to Denali Park, and I wanted a good camera. But then when I was running out of subjects in town, I would just go to the local pond and take pictures of the ducks. And the first one that I remember taking was a northern shoveler, which, if you know what that is, it's got a big, flattened spoon bill type thing, the shovel. And just looking at it, I'm like, this is not, to me, a duck is a mallard. When I'm uneducated, kind of like seagulls, they're all seagulls. Thinking, I can't post this, like, look at this cool duck I saw. So I had to, look through a book and figure out, and I was like, wow, this thing is really cool looking once you look at all the different plumages that they have. And now, like, all right, well, I got to start identifying. Look at all these other duck species. I bet they're all out there too. So I just would go back and have, my eye on one or two targets, or I would go on eBird. And on eBird, you could put, the place I would go to in Anchorage is Potter Marsh. It's pretty close to my house. You go to that hot spot, Potter Marsh, the month of, we'll say, the summertime, June, what has been seen in the last 2 weeks that I've never seen. And you can create these targets on there. And then, say a yellow warbler I've never seen, and it's been reported on 20% of the checklist. So it's probably a pretty good odds that I could see it. And then I would listen to all the calls that are on there to know what I'm listening for, and then just go there and wait and listen and try to get it by ear so that I could then locate it by sight. And that's basically how I started. It was just like going every day to try and find a couple new birds until I felt pretty good with all the local birds around here. It was just an exercise in getting out, and a lack of subjects really that just kind of turned my eyes towards the birds. And then I really, really enjoyed it. And then I realized, as time's gone on, how seasonal they are. And by staying in touch with, say, the bird migration, you can really see a bigger picture of the whole natural world. And, how many times have I been out somewhere and I hear an alarm call to turn my head and there's a bear or something? They are a part of that community. And once you figure it out, it really can help you see, either this, like I said, just immediate effects, stages of the seasons, watching the shorebirds come through, and then you start to see them trickle back through in the fall, and it just kind of builds a bigger picture of the natural world.
So there's a film. Is it called The Big Year?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what it's called? Or what?
Yeah,
what
there is one.
So there's people that, it's generally wealthy people that can afford to travel.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What
The
is
idea
that?
of
What is the
big
year?
year? It's I can't speak all the way back to the historical times, but like 100 years ago, the Christmas, a big thing was like the Christmas bird. Well, they used to go out on Christmas and hunt and kill birds. And then some guy was like, why are we naturalists just going out and killing everything? Let's start to be more sensible about it. And that slowly led to like field marks and identification and just viewing the birds and identifying them. But there would be the annual count, the Christmas bird count that still goes on today. But then they kind of, I don't know, if that kind of sparked this idea of being able to see like a large number of birds, and kind of listing is common amongst the birding community where people are just obsessed with having like a huge list. But the big year in terms of the movie covers an area that's the American Birding Association's, like the ABA area, which used to just be the mainland North America, but not including Mexico. So it was like the US and Canada, but excluding Hawaii. And then only so far off of the border, like so far into the ocean, but it's only like a mile or less. I can't remember what that is. And so basically from January 1st till December 31st, people would compete to try and see the most number of species of birds in that ABA area, which requires you to fly, like the stone chat shows up in Anchorage. So now someone's flying from New York City to Anchorage to see this one bird. So yeah, it usually is more of a wealthy sort of thing. That the big year is a fun movie. I think the book obviously is probably a little more interesting because the characters aren't so like Hollywooded. You get a little more reality of who they are. But that's basically what a big year is a competition to see who can see the most species. And in order to do that, you really need to have these, like Alaska comes in big time for the people who want to set records because you're going out to the Aleutian Islands, the Pribilofs, and trying to get these rare Eurasian species that are getting blown over. So it might just be a one-off bird that gets disrupted during migration or has some wiring or something wrong that it goes the wrong direction, and they're just trying to tick off those sort of rarities. And that's kind of where I get a little lost in the birding world. I can appreciate going and seeing it, but I'm no longer interested in driving 3-4 hours just to see some bird that's probably stressed out of its mind and unlikely to survive just because it ended up so far out of range. But it's still cool to see, and I would rather go see them in their native area and appreciate them that way. My long version of the big year.
Wasn't there a stellar sea eagle that showed up on the Denali Highway a couple of years ago?
Yeah, late in
and
the
it must have
fall,
been that sort of thing where it got blown over in a storm or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some interesting theories on like how birds get lost. They look at where they should be and where they end up, and they think sometimes their compass is just flipped and they'll be exactly the wrong distance, like to the north versus the south. That can be one theory or one thing that happens a lot. Or winds blow them just a few degrees off and then they end up in Alaska. That's another common thing. Or they're just exhausted and they'll ride in on boats and that sort of thing. But the Steller sea eagle, they're a coastal bird. You go to, like, I've been to Japan and seen them. They're all along the coast. They're beautiful, huge, massive eagles, this huge bill. And somehow this one was seen by someone cruising the Denali Highway late in the fall. I think it was probably there because of hunting, caribou hunting, and there's a lot of gut piles and stuff. And I mean, you're talking hundreds of miles inland, and this sea eagle is just cruising around. But there was one that was on the east coast of the U.S., and it moved its way up and down the coast and had people following it all over. So that's one of those where, like, I want to get that on my Alaska list or my ABA area list. People will go chase it just to have either their life list or their year list with those extra species. So yeah, they can become pretty hot commodities. Actually, the one thing that's not rare, well, I guess it is rare because of the disorder, but in town right now, the thing that I've been trying to chase a bit is there's a raven that has lucitism, where it's not albinoism where they lose all their pigment. It's just a lack of pigment. But this one is almost completely white, except a little smudging in the neck, and it has blue eyes. And it's just been bouncing around town for the last probably 2-3 weeks, and has quite a following online. People chasing it all over. And of course, it's in not the most desirable area. It's like right in these alleyways. It's just dumpsters and the backs of restaurants and businesses. And so trying to chase it down the road. And of course, I told you our roads are just like an ice rink. And so you'll have these potholes that are, 2-3 inches of just drop offs and cliffs, and trying to go around and chase this bird has been a challenge. I was filming in this one parking lot real quick. I jumped out and started shooting. And of course, this person walks out of the business like, "Hey, could I ask what you're doing?" I'm like, "Oh, that white raven in town that's real popular is right up there." She's like, "Oh, okay, that's really cool, but I'm the bank supervisor, and I am gonna have to tell the security guard there's a camera in our parking lot recording." I'm like, "All right, I'll leave." I wasn't aimed at the bank or anything, but she's like, "Yeah, it's our policy that if there's anyone recording, whether it's a cell phone or whatever, the security has to be involved." So I'll see. I don't know how much more I'm going to chase that bird around, just because I really, that's not my style of like driving and jumping out of the car and shooting 2 or 3 quick shots of it on a light post. But it is a really pretty bird, and I've got.
Did you get some video where you can drop it in for everyone to see?
Yeah, I'll throw a couple images up there at the very least.
That's cool.
But I wanted to do raven stuff, and I, like Michael was saying, I really love their calls. And if you're in Anchorage or anywhere, honestly, it's a horrible weather day. It could be negative temperatures, winds are howling, and the ravens are just out there having a ball. They're just fly up in the air and do flips and turns, and that's what I really want to shoot. So I'm waiting for the weather, honestly, to get kind of terrible so I can go out and try and shoot them in the worst of it and kind of show them in their element where they're their happiest. But I'll also chase this white raven for a little while too, because it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I'm glad you found it. That was quick.
yeah. I was able to go after we recorded the last failed one. I took off, and luckily I stumbled right upon it. So there's a couple people out shooting it for video with video stuff. I was surprised to see. Met someone local here that was shooting with the red and had a big setup. So we got to talking a little bit, but that was when the bank person kicked us out. So save that for another day. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if I have any other good stories. I guess the only other thing I didn't say was,
I have one.
My updates.
When I was filming in the Arctic for a job, I don't know when it was, not last year, maybe the year before, we had a cowbird show up.
Oh yeah, that's right.
At our camp, and we were 18 miles from the Arctic Ocean, and this little cowbird showed up, and I think I was texting with Eric on Zolio because I'm like, what is going on here? This little bird that probably shouldn't be here is just hanging, and it hung out for like 3 or 4 days and then just never left our camp. So Eric's like, well, it's probably never going to make it. It's probably one of those situations where its inside internal compass got screwed up and it just went the wrong way. But it had made it all the way up there, and it still had time to get back if it knew. But how do you know if it knows? And it was only there, like I say, 3 or 4 days and then gone. But every day that while it was there, you could go out and it would just be hanging out or looking around the tent if somebody dropped some food or whatever, something to eat. But I don't know, Eric, is that for Alaska in general, or cowbirds around, or is it more of
not
a
really
48 thing?
Yeah, no, they're not really up in this area. So when there is one that shows up, it's usually pretty exciting. I mean, in Anchorage, there's been one that I can think of in the last few years, and it was down by a 20-mile boat launch, which is, I mean, that's what, 40-minute drive from town. It's still in Anchorage proper, so it counts if you're really trying to do like an Anchorage County list, which is how they'd break it up. It's not by city, it's by county. So if you're trying to have like a list for your county, that counts. But yeah, it was just hanging out under boat trailers. And that was another rarity, that something that it was in the migration time, I think fall migration. So it's probably a fledgling, that year's bird that just something is wrong with it. But it's interesting the number of kind of rare bird sightings that end up way up north in the Arctic along the coastline, because, that kind of captures them. They can't keep going. But there's been like the Colville River Delta, there's a family that has big birding community or family there, and they have some really cool sightings of random things like cowbirds. They had a turkey vulture that was cruising around up on the north slope of Alaska, which you won't really ever see a turkey vulture in Alaska unless it's, a dispersed lost one or something. But yeah.
Do you have any vultures up there then?
No, not really. Nothing that's, established here.
Just all the rest. I did not know that.
Yeah.
The interesting thing too with like ravens and crows, like crows, what is it, Eric? Crows you can see like in Homer, but you won't see crows in Anchorage, right?
So that, if you're trying to see the crow, it used to be a northwestern crow, but they lumped them to just American crow. If you wanted to see that for the Anchorage list, it was a struggle to find a crow. But then you drive just, down to, say, Whittier, which is less than an hour away along the coast, and it switches almost to all crows and hardly any ravens. Or you go to Homer, it's almost all crows and almost no ravens. But then the opposite, once you get a little inland, I guess Anchorage is on the water, but it's not that productive compared to those areas. But yeah, the Girdwood gas station has a crow that hangs out at it. So that's where people go to get their crow for Anchorage. That's the level of, if you're a big lister, what you have to do. Have these little local oddities that you go find, and song sparrow that spends the winter downtown in like a parking garage. And we actually have a ruby crown kinglet that's been hanging out at our house, which they usually don't overwinter. Golden crown kinglets will, but ruby crowns usually don't. And it's been coming in and with the chickadees. So, but those are the fun things that get you out and make you pay more attention if you really want to appreciate kind of what's going on. I think that's what I found the biggest thing with birding for me is it really connects you into the environment so much more, just because you have to pay attention to sound and sight for these tiniest little things, the movement and stuff. It really helps train your eye.
We've gone long on this whole topic with birds and stuff, but the funnest thing I have is going out with Eric because I know he knows, right? So if there's a bird, I'm not the lifeless guy. I don't really keep track. I don't do eBird, but I love seeing birds and I love knowing that I've seen quite a few, but I could never tell you what I have and haven't seen unless it was some really big. I didn't see that stellar seagull, but I would have remembered that for sure. But it's fun. Like this year when we were doing a lot of the moose stuff, it was crossbills, right, Eric?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we had tons of crossbills, and they were just it was like an odd year according to Eric. It's like usually there's some crossbills, but this year there were just so many.
Yeah.
And they're a bird that doesn't nest. It can nest any time of the year, so it's not one that's just like a springtime nester. It can, and was it that situation where it just, I don't know, just interesting stuff.
I think we just had a really, really good cone
paying
crop.
Attention to other stuff.
Yeah. The cone crop is so good this year that they're just thick feeding. And then 2 years ago or a year ago, last winter, you wouldn't have seen hardly any crossbills. They were just gone. Just a matter of the seasonality of it too.
We had a huge robin year last year.
Yeah. Yep, I remember that. Remember when we were down looking at those long-eared owls? There were robins everywhere.
Yeah, it was like walking through robin forest. It was insane. And they said, when I looked back at the counts, there wasn't a ton of papers on it, but there was one that said it was 20 times more robins than their previous counts. It was insane.
Cool.
All right, let's switch gears. I think I'm trying to look at our old podcast notes here. And we were talking about YouTube. Is there anything specific we need to talk about? Any of the YouTube videos that we've put out that,
oh no,
essentially this podcast is supposed to be talking about, hey, we just did this really cool YouTube video. Go check it out.
Well, and I kind of want our audience to I don't know. And let me know if you guys don't feel this, but I feel like when you press the button to post as public, there's so much anxiety because some of those moose videos, I mean, that was 30 days of work sometimes that you're pulling clips from. I mean, there's stuff in that rut one that you shot over multiple years. And I think there's just so much excitement, but anxiety that I kind of want to share our growth, hope to be growth with the audience, because it's so exciting when you actually get view hours and people are enjoying it and they're commenting and you're getting subscribers. And that's what I just wanted to just kind of share our numbers so that we can all grow together. I don't know, because that's what this is about, right? So right now, as of December 4th, we are at 2,327 subscribers. We are up 126 in the last 28 days. And let's see, I'm just trying to get we have 1,800 public watch hours. So that's awesome. So we're 1,200 away from the 3,000 mark, which gets us the supers and shopping and all that stuff. And then we're 2,200 away from that 4,000 that gets us the actual ads that we can share with YouTube. So, I mean, it's incredible how fast it's gone, and it's been great. So thank you for everyone that's watching these videos. Thank you. If you want to see something specific, drop it below. We have a lot more in that we're trying to edit. It's just, this is all volunteer based, so we're getting through it when we can.
Volunteer based. I like that.
Well, yeah. I think we've spent more money than we've made on this for sure, being that we've made this much. So
that's my whole career.
Oh, gosh. Well, so it's funny you say that. I was talking to Kristen, my wife, and I was like, I think I figured something out. And what I figured out is that so many of these artists, you'll read their kind of dossier or their resume, right? And you're like, well, they've won all these awards. They sit on this board. They chair this board. They do video. They do photo. They run a company. They're volunteering for all these different things. And there are really good people out there that do all of those things a lot. But what I'm also finding is that it's just hits on goal sometimes. And you have to have your fingers everywhere when you're creative that you're your brand, right? And so your advertising, your word of mouth, like everything is based on you because no one else is going to do it for you. And so it's interesting to see, because when you're in a corporate world, sometimes it's like, oh, you were at this company or you went to this school or something like that. That was kind of the extent. And sometimes they'd be volunteers or different things. But I find that there's a lot more of that on this creative side than in the corporate world. So yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but anyway, what else did we miss, Michael? I think that was it.
Yeah, I think that was it.
Oh, I do want some homework for the audience. If you have heard a crazy sound, we would love to read your story in the comments. So post that below. If you have pictures of Bigfoot, we would love to see them. So reach out. You can send them to me on Instagram. You can send them to the guys via the email. Can you drop? I don't think you can post comments. Oh, you can post in the community. So we'll drop this homework out in the community, and you can put the photos there. That's how we'll do that. But yeah, we'd love to hear stories of like crazy things, because I remember hearing an owl in the middle of the night, and it was a barn owl, and it was absolutely terrifying until I figured out what it was. Mountain lions will do the same thing. So,
yep.
Okay. That would be a good. We need to do more of that community stuff.
Yeah, I know. We do need to. Well, we need to start it, is the thing.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we just need to get it. We don't need to do more. We just need to start.
It's so hard. Well, and like Moose Man is so good about it. They post like every day, and it's very like, some of them are really intimate about like a specific moose, right? Like Grumpy, right, was like one of their favorites, and so you'll read about Grumpy, and meanwhile I'm like, so there was a moose that we saw today, and it made me happy. And like I have more. I don't know. I'm just not a writer, is what I'm finding. Yeah.
That's my issue. We'll see for sure.
What's your ETA on your eagle video there, Eric?
Good question. I feel like every time I think I'm making like a big 50% of the progress, I realize that was a lot smaller amount, that the job just keeps getting exponentially bigger as I start diving into like music and sound and adding all those components in there. I don't know. I'll have a good draft, I would say, in a couple of days. I had to take yesterday off. We were having aside from not recording a whole episode of the podcast, I'm having issues with DaVinci and timeline stuff. My Eagle video, originally I had it pretty well cut, at least the narration part through, and then something happened where it just got all corrupted, and learning from that, but also finding that there might have been some issues in DaVinci's one of their updates. So starting from scratch is kind of, I don't know, I've lost a little bit of my motivation to go back and stare at the same thing over and over again. But yeah, totally. I would hope before we get another one of these recorded, that should be pretty close to being done, or at least a good draft for you guys to look through. I'm at the point where it starts snowing.
And then I got to do that.
So that's where I'm at in the timeline, if that tells you. Trying to fill it out. It's hard to go back through. I mean, I'm the newest to all this, obviously, telling you guys editing and everything. I'm the unpaid and inexperienced intern that's screwing stuff up. But
I don't know. I forgot to record myself. So
trying to keep everything organized, when you go through, and I'm talking about, this bird's chasing a gull and having to find all those clips and stuff. I'm still trying to develop my organization for all the files and things, and what's the best way, because I'll try it one method and then switch to a different method, and some things work and then some things are harder. So still developing all that while I'm editing this podcast and figuring things out. So it's going kind of slow. But
I don't know if you ever there. I don't know if you do.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Because I'm still trying to changing things.
I get frustrated. I actually found one channel that I'm kind of interested. Ryan Ing Films, I think it's his YouTube channel.
Oh yeah,
kind of a younger guy. It's just he's kind of going against the grain, or at least trying to create more like scripted vlogs type style of stuff where it's, you know, heavy in the narration, and it's very well fledged out before he goes and films anything. So trying to get some inspiration for that. Maybe not for this video, but at least how I could prepare better for future subjects and kind of figure out how to write that story ahead of time so that I can shoot a more focused piece, I guess. But yeah, that'll all come with time.
Yeah, and I think the whole thing is you watch a lot of these videos that I did. I mean, it took me all summer to figure out a recipe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can't tell you how much stuff I recorded that I've never used, and who knows if we'll ever use it, and probably not, because you just forget that you shot something, and then to go back through and say, "Oh yeah, I remember doing." I'm not that. My brain doesn't work that way. So, but you figure out a recipe, then you go out and shoot it, and then you edit it, and then you take a break. While I was down for the holidays with my family, my sister hadn't seen a couple of the YouTube videos, so I put them up, and we were just watching on her big screen. And that's where you really, you know, I'd given it a rest. It'd been out for a week or two or whatever, and then I pull it up, and then I'm watching it because she's watching it, and I'm thinking, oh, I should have done this, or that shot is way too long. You know, yeah, I'm interested in it because I shot it and it was hard to get, or I hiked a long ways, and it was my you know, it was my effort that got that shot. But in reality, the shot is like, it's all right. It's not great. And why did I put it in there? It's kind of dumb to have it in there. So it's just a process. It's just, you just got to spend a lot of time.
Well, and I think that what you struggle with is different than like what I struggle with, in that you have observed so many behaviors, like moose specifically, right? Like you've been around moose for days of your lifetime, whereas mine are still, it might be a day in accumulation.
Right.
And so I think what you suffer from is a bias because you've seen it so many times, whereas there's probably people in the world that have never seen a moose in real life. Like they've just seen it on screens. And so I think that's where that bias is hard. Like how much, it's a video about moose, so you want to see moose. So I don't know. It's struggle. I think having a good group of, well, and Eric, like he excels at this, having a people that you can bounce things off of critically and them say like, no, that's the stupidest thing in the world, is worth its weight in gold. And Eric's like a teacher. Like he'll send you back your things and you're like, did I get anything right? Because it's just like, it'd be like, it's a good thing you don't use red ink because it'd look like roadkill if it was my stuff. Like, and so, but it's so helpful.
Yeah.
And it comes out to be such a better product. And that is so useful. And so, like, you got to find those people in your life and keep them around and
I
try
like
not
to
to choke them
always
because
pull in people like Christy, my wife, who doesn't go out and really film with us, and say, watch this. Is this interesting? And just see,
yep.
you know, and I had her watch all my Eagle stuff and like, tell me if this is boring or not. And she's like, no, actually you know, I wasn't there and I like it. And it's good to have kind of that sounding board that's not there. Like watching Michael's stuff. I mean, I was standing within eyesight of him pretty much the whole time for all the moose stuff. And so it was a little bit harder for me to like have a good independent eye because I could see all these things that were happening. But it was also helpful too in the edit because I knew like, well, what about adding this or that? But
Right.
yeah, I know the other thing you said too is like we go out and do all these things, but I don't know what, like I feel like my life is not that interesting. And that was actually a video that Ryan put out there that I watched last night. It was like, your life is not that interesting. And he was struggling with just being like a high school graduate living in his parents' house. He has no money, no fancy cars. How am I interesting? But just him processing that thought is interesting. So I thought about when I was in Haines, I'm like, well, what is even interesting about being here? Because I've camped in my van for 6 years, you know, and it's just a tool for me. But a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people aren't camping somewhere remote or these road trips. And I should have probably done, maybe we'll do this in the future, is like if I have an idea that's not going to like corrupt or cause issues with people being there, I don't want to give away a location, but the idea and like, what do you want to see? Because what if the majority of people really just wanted to see, how do I set up a van and equip it with my gear and haul it safely? And now I'm just showing them me sitting out there shooting the eagles, and they'd rather see, other things. So yeah, that's the other thing I have to figure out is what is interesting. And then I'll realize that I'm probably not covering it with enough footage, because in reality, you pretty much need to be filming everything you're doing. And I got to get into that mindset, of developing it. So like, all right, I'm going to go look for this raven. So I'm like, you know what would be interesting, I guess, is me looking about where am I going to find this raven. So setting a camera up here at my desk and scrolling through Facebook, trying to see where the sightings have been and get that details. But yeah, it's kind of daunting how much coverage you would need. But I guess tell us what you guys would find as interesting in these trips, because there's probably a lot of stuff, like Michael said, we shot that we just didn't include because a lot of it's just second nature to us, that we go out and do this stuff all the time. It might not be that interesting to us, or it doesn't even occur to us that it is cool.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, because it's even like making coffee in the van, which is something you do every day, right? Every day you get up, you make coffee, and then you go do your thing. I can't tell how many people I watched where they highlight the whole making coffee, whether it's Peter McKinnon that's doing some fancy coffee machine thing or whatever, all the way to somebody that's rolling into the local horrible Conoco coffee dispenser and getting the worst cup of coffee in their life. But that's part of the process. And you do find it interesting because it's more real life and it's more relatable. But if you can intermix that with stuff that's not so relatable, kind of like what you said, Brandon, where a lot of things you take for granted because you see it a lot, other people don't see it ever. So they're probably going to be very interested in it. Yeah, it's just finding that balance.
It's tough.
Yeah, and it really, I don't think it'll be that tough. It's tough to start, but once you figure it out, then it won't be, and it's just taking the time. Sometimes it'd be kind of nice to have somebody that's not one of us to shoot that kind of stuff. Yep. Because then they would be more apt to say, oh, well, you, whatever. Well, I can't even think of a good example. When you're cooking your dinner at night, you're doing blah, blah, blah. Or when you're sleeping in really cold temperatures, like I think on the last podcast, I talked about Eric was scraping the inside of his windshield one morning because it was so cold out.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that for me, I don't want to take the time to do it. I want to take
cameras rolling all the time, and you have things that you need to do, and you just start doing it and you don't think about it. So having that shadow with the camera would be helpful.
I think about it like an hour later.
Yep.
I should have shot that.
Yep.
So you're good at that though, Brandon. You did a good job at that when you were doing your own channel, and I think you pay attention to that stuff.
Yeah, I would do a lot of that, but I would miss like so I'd have like everything that led up to a story point and then not have a story point because I wasted all my time filming all the stuff before. I don't know.
Yep. We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
Okay. Well,
stay with us until
then. You want to take us away, Michael?
I don't have anything to take away.
Do you have a conclusion?
I don't have a good conclusion. I don't have that whole catchphrase. We need to have that catchphrase. What is that catchphrase?
I don't know.
until next time, right? Yeah. I can't get it to work.
I couldn't even make a decent one. Look, it's already ripped.
It
That's
adds
too
to
funny. What do you call that?
This is a tinfoil hat.
Yeah, but what is it like?
It's supposed to protect my head from.
I can't read his thoughts.
Aliens. Oh, is that what it is?
I don't know. The signal will bounce off.
I mean, it's making my head hot. I don't know.
I guess be on the lookout for more of these. We're going to try to do one a week, right?
Yep.
Now that we're all in the same spot.
We got some fun stuff coming up.
As summer gets busy, then, we won't no way get one a week. But in the wintertime, we should be able to. And then if there's specific things you want us to talk about, whether it's filmmaking or wildlife or photography or whatever. I mean, that helps if we can get people to give us ideas beyond what we're already going to do. I think anything we're going to do is going to be okay and decent content, but there might be some stuff out there that we wouldn't think about.
Yeah.
So you want to subscribe to the channel? That would be the best.
Yep. Watch everything.
Yeah. Go to the playlist and hit play all. And let it run through all the ads so we get paid.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, we don't get those yet.
No, we don't get it yet, but eventually I do that. I find myself, I watch YouTube 100% of the time when I'm working out. And I stay and watch all the ads just so whoever I'm watching gets
nice of you.
A little. I mean, they're probably getting 1/10 of 1 cent, or whatever it is.
More than zero.
It's more than zero.